Hi guys, welcome to my 4th grade classroom. In this lesson, I taught language arts, figurative language, and incorporated art through observation. First, I thought, how can I add art in language arts? I thought of different art techniques I've used in my past experiences, such as magazine collage, painting, building stuff, clay, stamping, and observing art. Before I chose a topic, I took a trip to the art room to see what materials the art teacher had available for my classroom. After meeting with the art teacher, I then met with my cooperating teacher to tell her the exciting news of using art as part of a lesson. She suggested implementing art in language arts during their writing portion of the class. The students are working on how to write personal narratives with descriptive sentences. The students are also working on figurative language and the different types there are. We talked about the different materials I would need and how to divide my time efficiently. I also had to think about what art technique I would use. So I began my research and came upon The Scream by Edvard Munch and how to incorporate it into their writing. For the engagement part of the lesson, we created a bubble map. In the middle of the bubble map, it says, how do we express ourselves? According to students, we express ourselves through writing, the clothes we wear, speech, body motions, actions, and drawing. We focus on 2 forms of the expressions, which were writing and art or drawing. I asked students how is writing a form of expression and how is art a form of expression. We discussed the different components of knowing the mood of a text or the mood of an artwork. I told the students that we are going to observe a form of expression through art. They observed the scream and we created a bubble map what is going on in the painting. Then I introduced my version of the scream and had them do the same. I asked if they had any proof of the painting and its meaning. And of course, they said no because there's no written document of it being explained. We then transitioned to reading the passage provided as a whole group. As I read the passage, we would stop and talk about how the author used descriptive language instead of directly telling the reader something. I emphasize on how interesting a story can be when descriptive or figurative language is used. I gave them a copy of the passage, and in pairs they identified the different forms of figurative language integrated in the story. They were to underline the sentences. For example, a sentence in my story was, "The weight of the world was off my shoulders," which the students should have underlined. Once they were done, the pairs could then share within their table groups. We gathered into a whole group and the students told me where they found figurative language in the story. The students would give an example they found and their reasoning behind it. Then I asked another student to explain the type of figurative language it was, such as metaphor, hyperbole, or onomatopoeia. As the student read their example, the student came up to the board and underlined the sentence. I have a class of 12, so each student had the opportunity to come up to the board. We reviewed the passage for a second time and we went over the new figurative language the students came up with. We then transitioned in the kernel writing format. The students matched the kernels with the paragraphs. I emphasize on how each kernel is asking a descriptive question and I answered them in my story. The kernels asked about the story. How did it begin? What I saw? How did I feel? What was I doing? Where was I? And how did it end? I reminded the students that the more descriptive they are, the more descriptive their art can be. We transitioned into the writing portion of the class. The elaboration part of the lesson actually takes more than 1 day, so one day we are writing their draft and revising it. The second day they are painting with the watercolor pencils. The second day we came as whole group and I modeled how to use the watercolor pencils correctly and explained how the amount of water and the color they start with will affect their portrait. The students drew their artwork after publishing their writing and then began painting. The only requirement for the artwork was a head or a circle with their facial expressions. The rest of their portrait should include elements and details from their story. I used a rubric to evaluate their work as well as their personal writing. I evaluated their writing and assessed as they follow the requirements such as 1 use of figurative language, detailed descriptive sentences, an interesting beginning, and through their presentations in front of the class. After presentations, we gathered again and discussed the scream portrait and how the passage I found online describes why he is screaming and the meaning behind the portrait. Incorporating art for the first time was such a learning experience for me. Time was limited in the classroom, so that was an obstacle I encountered. I also didn't give a time limit when the students were drawing, so a few students didn't have a chance to paint during that time period. I would have also given more specific directions because I had some students who just copied my example. I liked that the students had an experience with the watercolor pencils because they thought it was so cool. I also thought using art was an effective way for students to express their personal narratives.